So who remembers, or I'll give you some space. Who remembers what we've been talking about the last little while? We left Joshua behind. What is the book of the Bible that comes after Joshua? What do you think? Judges. And what's a judge? People who kind of saved the people of Israel. That's right. It's okay, Avdukia. Come on, have a seat. So, when the children of Israel rebel against God and they go astray and they get turned over to enemies, then the people repent and God sets up judges for them. So we've talked already about Ehud, who had the sword with the fat king, and we've talked about Deborah and Balak and Jael and the spike through the head and all of that stuff. Okay, that was last week. Okay, now we're going to be a little bit less bloodthirsty. Because what do you think the children of Israel did after Deborah and her crowd saved them for God? What do you think they did? They worshiped false gods again. That's right. This time they worshipped Baal. We were talking about Baal before. Baal is the Canaanite god of thunder. Okay? So kind of like Thor, but not as cool. And still a pagan god. But then the people repented. They repented and they asked God for help. So God sent his angel to a man named Gideon, who was working with his crops. So he was reaping the crops and getting them ready, and all of a sudden the angel of the Lord comes down and says, "Hey, Gideon." And Gideon says, "Uh-oh." Because when a person shows up who seems like they're kind of on fire, then you know this is not a normal day. Right? So, let's see. What happens? The angel says, "Guess what, Gideon? The Lord is with you. You are a mighty man of valor." And Gideon says, "Well, if God is with us, then why have all these bad things happened to us?" And the angel says, "Well, I think you know why. But guess what? Now, God has called you, and you are going to help. You're going to deliver your people. God is going to give you strength." And Gideon says, "How am I going to know that that's true? Maybe you're just trying to trick me." So he says, "How about this? You stay here, and I'm going to go and get an offering to give to you, and I'll bring it back." So Gideon goes, and he takes a goat, and he kills the goat, and he brings it, and he makes an altar, and he puts it on the altar, and he brings it to the angel. And the angel says, "Okay, put everything out there." And then the angel puts out the staff that he has, and he touches the sacrifice, and a fire comes up and goes from it, and the angel went up in the fire. So Gideon said, "Okay, I guess that was an angel. I wasn't just imagining that he looked a little bit different. If he touches the sacrifice and it goes up in flames and he goes up with it, that's more than just a magic trick." Right? Hang on. Now, so then Gideon says, "Okay, I'm going to do what God told me to do." And what God told him to do was to take his yoke of oxen and go to where the big statue of Baal was and pull it down. So Gideon does that. And the people get all mad at him, but he says, "Hey, I was just doing what God told me to do." And then let's see. Then what happens? We're not going to tell the whole story of Gideon, but there's one piece. Because God comes to him again and says, "Okay, you pulled down the idol. That's what I told you to do. Now you're going to do one more thing. You're going to call together an army, and that army is going to drive the enemy away." It was the Midianites that were the bad guys here, the people of Midian, right? That's not important, except that if you read it, then you recognize it. So Gideon, he's still questioning. He wants to make sure. So he says, "God, I want you to give me a sign. I want you to do a miracle so that I know that you're actually going to help me." So Gideon says, "Listen, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a fleece." What's a fleece? Do you know what a fleece is? It's sort of like the wool of a sheep that's been cut off of it, so it's all soft and so forth, right? He says, "I'm going to take a fleece and I'm going to leave it outside during the night." This is like during the summertime. "And when the dew comes, I know it's going to make the fleece wet and it's going to make the ground wet. So the miracle I want you to do for me, Gideon says to God, is I want the fleece to still be wet after the ground is dry. Okay. God says, sure. So the next morning, Gideon goes and he looks, and sure enough, the fleece is still wet and the ground is dry. Is that a miracle? What do you think? What's going to stay wet longer? The ground, which is kind of not absorbent, or a sponge? Right. So Gideon thinks, I asked God for a miracle, but I kind of messed it up and did it wrong. It's just sort of what would have happened anyway. So he goes back to God and he says, so I think I got that wrong. Can you do the miracle the other way next morning? Can you make the fleece be dry and the ground around it wet? And God says, I thought you might be back to ask that. Maybe think about your miracles before you test God, huh? And sure enough, the next morning, the fleece is dry and the ground around it is wet. And Gideon says, okay, now I believe that you're really God who's talking to me. What do you want me to do? But we'll talk about that next time, because otherwise we'll be here all day. Okay? What's the lesson? The lesson again is when we go astray, when we repent, God hears us and he calls us back to him. And maybe the lesson is be careful what kind of miracles you ask for. Okay? Because sometimes what you're asking for is just going to happen anyway. All right? Stand up. Let's take communion together.